Wow. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Hey, buddy, what's up?
Oh, just another day in paradise. Cold and
Is it?
foggy here.
Last I heard, Paradise was rebuilding after a massive fire. What about Utopia? Try that place.
Mm, I heard that place became very dystopian.
Yeah, yeah. It became full of like Republicans that had a different agenda on what Utopia should be, and it all fell to shit.
Hmm.
You know, Hi everybody, welcome to Public Access America. Our live stream is on YouTube every Sunday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and you can hear our podcast anywhere you find your favorite podcast. I didn't even create a note this week, Jeffrey, because I just figured after 2 weeks, you had a week off. I had Adam in as a special guest host, and that went really well. How was
Fun.
how was your time off?
It was great.
Yeah.
Just sometimes you just got to take a break, and it's been so busy lately for me,
Mm,
and just being able to sit down and relax and not do much has been really helpful.
yeah.
Just in the general scheme of things. So,
It's a hard thing for people to relax. I know me personally, I feel guilty when I do it because there's always something to do. And every time I take time for myself, I feel guilty about that.
no, and that's people shouldn't feel guilty about taking,
I
time for
know.
themselves. You
Right.
know, we kind of, I you grow up conditioned with the whole you got to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Your body just doesn't
No.
do that.
Right. But yeah, you're right. We're trained to just keep driving forward till we die, I don't know.
Mhm.
Is that a corporate mentality? Is that how they want their workers, or is that an American thing or a world thing? Is it just progression of technology giving us more access for more things to do?
Honestly, I would say that it's somewhat of a holdover from the old world, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Growing up a farmer, one of the things that you realize, that most people don't think about is like, especially when you have cows, the cows don't, just fend for themselves on Sunday, and Saturday. You,
Yeah.
you still got to go out there and feed them. In an agrarian life, you're not taking days off. You
Mm.
still got stuff to do. And so a lot of that, comes from the idea that, well, if, from the agrarian lifestyle, you're constantly working. And so, you bring that over into whatever other work world exists. And really that's just, you know, did we do it? Yes. But when you look at what our lifespan used to look like, not exactly, great data point.
Right. No, that's a good point. I talked with Adam last week about domination mentality. And because somebody had mentioned that, because I'm always looking for the root causes of things. And I saw a lot of anger and I was like, where did that come from? And I was like, judgment. If we stop judging the situation, we won't be angry about it. But then I realized, why do we judge? We judge because we've been raised in this like domination mentality where we have to conquer and be better than everyone else until there's no
Hmm.
one else remaining. And I think that's another core. I can't wait to find out what caused domination mentality. You know what I mean?
Oh, I'm going to go with that's probably another carryover from the old world.
Right. No, I believe that. But what you said just triggered it because you were like in an agricultural society,
Hmm.
you have to constantly work. But agricultural society, it said that agricultural society brought us out of the dark ages and into modern civilization. So how did
Hmm.
it seems to be a split because farmers aren't domineering, right?
No,
But like the
well, I mean,
governments that control the land are maybe like how do we get domination mentality from an
oh,
agricultural society,
I
it's
mean,
weird to me.
oh, you could go through an entire history of that. I mean, you think about it from the days of being nomads and hunters and
Hmm.
gatherers, you're always having to dominate the landscape because guess what? If you don't dominate the landscape, you die.
That's true. I never think of a farmer like shooting bears and wolves just to keep his like property safe, or
Well,
the Mongols or something. You know what
well,
I
even
mean?
just as recent as like the Old West, you think about it,
Mm,
you go back and you watch some of those movies, somebody rides up to the house, what do you typically see? Somebody's out there with the damn shotgun or a rifle,
yeah.
usually. And why is that? Because you never knew who was going to be coming out there to take your stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So the reality is that even as recently as 150 years ago, that was still very much a thing.
There's been farmers and pillagers, right, throughout
Hmm.
history. But I don't know, in a modern age, do we really need that domination mentality to control every aspect of our lives? You know what I mean?
Well, and I think that's really just, finding out that balance. It just depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
If you're going into something where you're trying to be, let's say a CEO of an organization, being weak-willed is not going to get you there.
Right. But being empathetic might be an attribute that we would want, you know?
Well, and I think that just highly depends on the organization itself too,
Yeah.
because in the end, whether, being empathetic does help your cause, but when you have, let's say, 600 other people or organizations working towards the same cause that you are, and you think you have the best idea, you still have
Hmm.
to be somewhat dominant in order to make sure that your idea is the one that is fostered and grown and not somebody else's.
Good point. Good point. But in an opinion-based way, we don't really need to force our opinions on others. I'm trying to segue into the two topics. There's three topics this week, two of which I want to talk about. One, I think we is a to be determined because we just don't have enough information. And you and I talked
Yep.
briefly ahead of time that we really don't want to cover Omicron until we have more information and we have an
Right.
informed voice with us, which just leaves the Supreme Court and abortion and that whole thing. And man, the shooting in Michigan. You know what I mean?
Well, dealer's choice. Which would you like
Yeah.
to start with?
Or a topic of your own. I really wanted to see where Jeffrey's head was at because I seem to be a consumer and I think you took a break from a lot of that. So I'm kind of curious. Like,
I did take a break from a lot of that, and I think we can definitely get into like the me consuming absolutely nothing and how healthy that is for your mentality.
except for
Um,
turkey, right? And stuffing, cranberry sauce.
I didn't even do that, dude.
Wow.
Yeah, our plans kind of got sank, and that was fine. It worked out that both Debbie and I just needed a break.
Oh, that I believe. And yeah, you got to recharge your brains. I think that's funny. I had homemade egg McMuffins what I
Hey, there
had
you
for
go.
Thanksgiving, you know. I
There
was
you go.
happy. I had the house to myself and I was just happy to lay in bed and watch football. Man, that was
Perfect.
nice. It was a nice day and I did downgrade a little. Yeah, I did recharge, I think.
So both topics are awful. So
Yeah. Or a third. We could talk about Russia massing troops on Ukraine
oh,
and Lithuania, you know.
I figure that'll come up regardless.
I hope
Let's
so, because Russia is in our top five listenership again. So I always want to try and change the hearts and minds of the Russian people and let them know that their forces are amassing against somebody that's not in an attack formation. Ukraine and Lithuania are in a defensive formation. They're not trying to attack Russia in any way. So I don't know. Anyway,
I mean, well, Russia's not a bad topic to talk about to start with before we ease into local awful.
yeah.
Um, so I mean, the issue between Russia and Ukraine's been ongoing for, well, it's 7 years going on 8. You know,
Really since World War II, right? When Russia
I,
lost so much and tried getting more and all that stuff.
well, I mean, to to go through the entirety of Russian-Ukraine relationship is, I mean, you're going to
Let's
go
start at
back
the beginning.
centuries.
Two
You're going to go
people
back
were born, one in
centuries.
Russia, one in Ukraine.
Well, and even then, you look back to, what was her name? I just watched something on her. Um,
Russian or Ukrainian?
Ukrainian.
Mm.
Is it Saint Olga? Basically, she was one of the I want to say she's one of the queens of the Kievan Rus, and so the Kievan
Oh,
Rus, so the Rus, you had different tribes of the Rus, and Kievan Rus, from some historians' perspectives, they lay the foundation for what is the modern, you know, Russo-Slavic area, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, things like that.
right, right.
So you could start there. You could start with what would be probably more the run up to World War I. You could start with the Bolshevik Revolution. You could start with um, the you could start with post World War II Soviet Union and the different SSRs. You could start with the post-Soviet breakup. When you look at that particular area,
That
it's
breakup, I think, is a good place to start.
well, and one of the things that we have to keep in mind as Americans, we didn't grow up with this constantly reshaped, reforming boundaries of different nations through different wars. The United States has only expanded; it's never really contracted in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
And and our our situation has bknow pretty solid since 1950s with I would say really the only two issues that are outliers are you've got the Philippines, Malaysia, that at one point wanted to be part of the United States and then ultimately said, nah, fuck that, we're going to do our own thing.
That's a shame.
Then and then you've got Puerto Rico, who wants to be a part of the United States, but for whatever reason, our government, despite the Puerto Ricans voting in favor of it, have said no. So there's that.
Yeah, we don't want to change the flag,
Which, whatever. I think
whatever.
that's a terrible decision.
Yeah.
Besides, it's you think about it like a 52 deck of cards. 51.
Hmm.
It's a 51 deck. It'd be a 51 deck, but if you made DC a state, then you know, you'd have to go through and figure out who's going to be the spades, the clubs, the hearts, and the diamonds. And
Right. But if Texas secedes and California breaks up into four states and the Dakotas become one state, I mean, I don't know where we're at this point. So
but anyways, back to Ukraine and
yeah,
Russia.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Vladimir
So
Putin. Let's go with Vladimir Putin age because
so let's.
I don't want to go
I
too
think
far back in the history.
Well, but I think we do need to establish some history is the thing because really what you have is when you get to the Bolshevik Revolution, you have all of these different areas that were countries, duchies, whatever. They get brought in underneath of the Soviet Union, and essentially they get divided up into different administrative areas, with
Mm,
like the Ukrainian SSR being one of them. And so you have what you end up having is you have these lines that are drawn for Soviet purposes of administration and kind of along ethnic-ish lines. But in the end, come the fall of the Soviet Union, many of those areas still stay the same, with some fighting over who gets what.
right. Tribal
Um,
regions and such.
you have extensive fighting with Chechnya. You have Georgia with the South Ossetia, and there's one other region. I mean, you've got Azerbaijan and Armenia going at it.
Oh man, yeah.
Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan. You've got a tire fucking mess over there.
Yeah.
So just to kind of give you some context, with the fall of the Soviet Union, some places were able to say, all right, we're going to keep our what was our administrative areas, and that's going to be our state territory. Some places didn't do that and are still fighting over it.
Mm,
But some of what the current issue comes from is the fact that even though the Soviet Union was, in the eyes of most Americans, this giant overlapping entity, there were still these individual SSRs that were, effectively countries,
right.
um, that they still had their own territorial issues and their own territorial desires. Ukraine being one of them. But because you had this large Russian presence that was in all of these countries,
Hmm.
what ends up happening is you have a significant Russian diaspora that's placed in all of these areas. So this is where, now, we get to the post-Soviet Union, we move in, past the Boris Yeltsin days into the Vladimir Putin days.
Yeah.
And
Vladimir wants
then
to expand back to its former glory.
I would say that definitely is probable. Um, I would also say that I guess I can't speak for the Russian people, but in a lot of polling, there's a lot of Russians who feel that at least under the Soviet Union, Russians felt powerful, and that hasn't been the case for a long time.
Right.
And so there is somewhat of a nostalgic feeling for those Soviet days without actually being Soviet. And so what ends up happening is you have Crimea, you have this region uh, of Ukraine. I want to say Donbass, and starts with an L. I can't remember it. Um, but there's a lot of ethnic Russians, and so you
Right.
start to ask, why are there ethnic Russians? Well, the answer is, you know, Crimea used to host the Baltic Fleet, or not the Baltic Fleet, the Black Sea Fleet,
Yeah,
Black Sea,
they're off the Black Sea, right?
Black Sea Fleet. I'm thinking other direction. That's Baltic Fleet is where Kaliningrad is, but that's another story in and of itself.
And it used to be Russia. Ukraine, Crimea used to be Russia, so there is Russians there, right?
Well, kind of, sort of, but not really.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it just all depends on what history map you want to look at.
Okay.
Remember, this is a place where you just have this amalgamation of fighting and borders expanding and contracting and
Right,
different
right.
rulers sitting at different heads at different times, and you have centuries upon centuries, and it's just a matter of how far back or how far forward do
Hmm.
you want to look, or how
But
recent.
it's kind of like Texas expanding and El Paso being Mexico suddenly being Texas, but still primarily a Latin region. You know what I mean?
So with so with so with Eastern Ukraine, you have a lot of Russian speaking
Mm,
Ukrainians there, Russian ethnic Russians that are in Ukraine. And you have a lot of ethnic Russians that are still in Ukraine from the days of the Soviet Union. And so it then becomes this question of who actually is the owner of the land. We've talked about this a lot, where, lines drawn artificially based on
yeah,
other powers doesn't necessarily work out to be the best.
right.
So, typically, what you'd seen in the past was is that, you'd have territories carved out by actual ethnic majorities of an area.
Hmm. Right, right.
But administratively, what you saw in the breakup of post-Soviet Union, and I would argue you've seen it in World War One as well, and post colonial Britain, you have these
Britain
maps.
took all the land and divided it for themselves, for other
Mhm,
people. Like all the land, all of the current popular borders were made by them. You know what I
right.
mean? So
So
in the Middle East anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, so you have a lot of conflicting claims to different areas. What was once administratively held by Ukraine during the Soviet era, and I would probably argue most likely prior to the Bolshevik Revolution, um, Russia sees as also their own, because there's probably going to go back and be some territorial claims in monarch Russia's period, in Tsarist Russia period. Um, but the reality is that for 100 years, it's administratively and physically been Ukraine. With Crimea, I want to say that Turkey actually held claim to Crimea for a long time. And even Turkey weighed in, saying that it either goes back to Ukraine or it should go back into their hands.
Okay.
That was an interesting take in and of itself. So then it goes down to, what does the fighting look like? You have territorially what the state of Ukraine claims is theirs, but then when you look at the ethnic issue, at hand. You have ethnically what Russia and what probably the eastern part of Ukraine feels is that they belong within Russia. And supposedly, and I say supposedly because, well, it's kind of hard to have any sort of an election when you've got military presence. The Crimean Peninsula voted to become part of Russia. But there again, when you're occupied, it's kind of hard to see that you have a free
Yeah.
and clear path to say, no, we're
Yeah.
not.
Especially when
So,
you have a Russian influence that's known to, you know, skew things their direction, let's say.
right. But at the same time, too, the idea that
Skew things. I bet you there's people in Russia going, fuck you, skew things.
oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I can we can go into how the United
Yeah, no.
States skews things. That's
Yeah. We just do
you,
it in Latin America and the Middle East.
well, also with Russia too. I mean, there's so much fucking propaganda on our part, and I
Of
mean, let's
course.
be realistic.
Mhm.
The country built on democracy has had a history of fucking with other people's elections.
Right.
So there's that. Uh, but trying to stick to the more historical
Yeah.
side of things without
And
without
before we get too far, there's borders that are in conflict between those two countries, but then there's borders that are recognized by the EU and the world. So
correct. And it's that whole like who recognizes what border is,
right.
it's all over the map. Hey,
Okay.
that's a
But
great pun right there.
so
Who recognizes what?
Vladimir Putin has amassed 100,000 troops. Um,
Mhm.
Vladimir Zelensky, Vladimir, I had it. He stopped a coup attempt apparently, and yeah, there's worries now. People are
Yep.
saying that the United States should come in and defend them, but nobody else is, and that's where I want to get to. Like, is it totally our responsibility to keep Russia from doing this, or should the EU be some way more involved in this?
Oh, now this is where it gets really interesting.
Because we're the
So,
world police and we don't want to be and nobody wants us to be, but every time there's a problem they're like, come and save us, and we're like, but you said no. you know
oh, absolutely. So, you've got two issues at hand here when it comes to Ukraine, at least in the Western eyes. Number one is, obviously, should the United States be responsible for rolling in and protecting Ukraine?
right.
But then you also have number two, Russia's issue with Ukraine trying to become a member of NATO.
That's Russia's big that they're trying to keep them from going there. That's what all this is about, right? To keep them
Right.
from going into NATO.
Which case, that's I think if you're trying to keep a country from going into NATO, putting 100,000 troops on their border is probably not the way you want to say, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
Let's have a friendly relationship that doesn't involve NATO. Please, let's actually work out some trade deals that are beneficial to both of us. Let's
Hmm.
let's try and have some friendly relationship. Not doing the whole, hey, we don't want you in NATO. By the way, here's 100,000 troops on your border.
Hmm.
The choice is yours.
Do you know how much money Ukraine got from Russia just for having land rights for the pipe, the oil pipeline?
Hmm.
And now this new pipeline is going to cut Ukraine out.
Hmm.
I mean, and now Germany's becoming dependent on Russian gas. It's like, do people not understand that like they're giving Russia all this leverage to do what they're doing?
Well, that goes back to the whole discussions that we've had about, energy diversification. If
Hmm.
your economy is held hostage by another state, it doesn't matter what state,
Right.
you're always going to be having to play the role of appeasement. And,
It
even the
sucks.
World Health Organization, or was it the World Health? Yeah, World Health Organization came out and said that in terms of making it to like net zero, and zero emission, nuclear has to be on the table for power generation.
Oh yeah.
So the fact of the matter is that
A different
As
kind of nuclear, though. Not the nuclear we think that makes bombs, the nuclear that actually doesn't leave as much fissile material, you know?
correct, and eventually, that'll actually move towards fusion material, fusion
Mm-hmm.
reactors. So it'll all just it'll eventually get there, but it's not there today.
Right.
Um, so here's the thing: is does Russia of course looks like the aggressor in Western eyes, absolutely. You know, there's that would be like us just looking at Mexico and going, yeah, we're just having issues with the migrant crisis, so you know we want you to work on this, but in the meantime we're just going to throw 100,000 American troops, tanks and vehicles at the southern border. And Mexico, the choice is yours to really decide what you're going to do about this. It doesn't work.
That idea is disgusting to me. Sorry.
Exactly, it's a terrible idea. And guess what? It doesn't do. It doesn't actually fix the problem.
Right. It just addresses it in a
Not even.
negative
It
way.
doesn't even address the problem. Basically,
Then people just get hysterical over it. And it gets attention is more of my point.
in the 1860s, we called it gunboat diplomacy, is what it was. You'd
Mm.
have you'd have you'd have a vast naval power show up off your shore, and it's like, look, we're not saying you shouldn't do this, but it'd be a lot cooler if you did. Like they
Right.
had a fucking choice, and so it was called gunboat diplomacy, is what it was called, and it's no different.
Mm.
You throw a bunch of arms at the border of any country and say, hey, look, we don't like the decision you're making, the choice is yours.
That's what the Pilgrims did, by the way. That's
Mm,
ironic. They just
yeah,
came off America's shore, found out there was Indians there, and began shooting their cannons until the Indians thought they were gods.
right. Yeah,
Happy
not the best,
Thanksgiving, by the way.
not the best decision at all, at all.
No, no.
So, so the question really becomes, what do you do to try and either soften or repair Russian-Ukraine relationships?
Yeah.
And if your answer is troops, tanks, whatever, look, it's not going to go the way that you think it's going to go. I mean, at best, you just end up pulling yourself into a war that, number one, Russia's going to throw, money and troops at, and then the West is going to throw money and troops at. Like that's the reality. You know,
That
we've
Russia
we've
looks like the aggressor because Russia is being aggressive. They could very easily do an influence campaign and throw money at the region and move people in that are more Russian people into the area and then have these votes that would give them all of this very legally. But they seem to want to
mm,
be the aggressor and take things by force for some reason. And that's my whole issue is that they put a 10 on it when it could be done at a 3 over a slightly longer period of
well,
time.
I think the issue at hand is that the way that it, at least the way that it's perceived here, is that that's what Russia did was they've had people move in, they've had ethnic
Mhm.
Russians take this come in and live in this area and work in this
Good.
area,
That's great.
and now they're like, okay, now it's ours, we're going to take it by force.
Okay, because there was a vote that said we want to be part of Russia.
Yeah, not really. Once again, it's one of those, it's kind of hard to have a free and fair election when there's guns sitting outside the polls.
Well, I agree, but I can't just go to the elections are bad and always tainted.
Well, I mean, let's be
I gotta
realistic.
kind of gotta stand by them at some point.
Well, but it's one thing to try and do
Mhm.
all the elections are fake and false and wrong, but
Right.
objectively, you can have multiple organizations say that an election is flawed, and
That
that
is a tightrope trap, isn't it? Either you say
absolutely
all are fair or all are bad. There's a combination of all of them. I just
right.
don't want to assume that it's not real because Russia was a part of it. But
And
I've
that's
never seen an election that Russia's been a part of that's been free and fair. So it's tough. It's
well,
tough to give them the benefit of the doubt
I
as well.
mean, I've got friends who are Russian, and they they laugh and say, I don't understand what you Americans are complaining about. You're complaining about the fact that it's taking you 10 hours to get the results of the election when we've had the results 2 hours before it ever started.
Right?
So
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, democracy in and of itself is an experiment, and at least the American version of it is very much an experiment of
Hmm.
how free can a country be, and excuse me,
Yeah. And the
willing and willfully and willingly participate in the idea that we get to choose who leads us.
right. Give us our freedoms and let us take the direction we're taking.
So it's really tough because even the United States is seen to have a flawed democracy, and
Oh,
and
yeah.
and that's it's tough because when you don't feel like you have a whole lot of choices, you kind of end up just going with whatever for however long it takes.
Yeah.
You know, in the history of the United States, we had more parties in the first 100 years of the country than we've had in the last 150.
Right.
In the last
I,
150, we've had two parties with a
I think
smattering of others, but
I think to myself, like the government, a nuclear bomb isn't communist or democratic. It's just a bomb. It's whoever's using it. And that's the issue. You know what I mean?
hmm
I like
absolutely.
democracy. I'm never going to say I don't like democracy because I haven't seen another government that offers the freedoms we do. So I'm
Right,
sticking with it because this is the most free a people can be in this 2021 planet.
right. And the reality is that when I say like this democracy, the reality is that it's not American democracy that we're talking about because, I mean, Mexico has democracy, Canada has
Hmm.
democracy, UK has democracy, France, Belgium, Germany, Poland,
Wait, guess
Latvia,
who else?
Lithuania, Estonia,
Barbados.
Barbados.
Mm,
Barbados has
I love that.
democracy. The reality is that there's so many democracies out there.
Hmm.
One of the things that Americans need to understand and move past is this weird concept of American exceptionalism, where our way is the only way. When the reality is that was it 212 countries and like 198 of them have their own democracies.
Right. That's the
you
weird
know,
thing. America's never been the our way country. We're the let's combine all of the best of ways. That's why we've always brought in the best and brightest because it's
Mhm.
perceptions and attitudes that are exceptional from other countries and that we learn from. If we bring in the best people from India, we get the best perspectives from India. And that's America. To say that America and our thoughts alone are what make it is antithetical to what America is, isn't it?
I would argue that's exactly the case. You've got people who come from other countries yearning for a version of freedom in which they're able to, start their own businesses without having to
Hmm.
pay local officials bribe money in order to get
Right.
licenses.
Right.
I mean, here we call it taxes, but whatever, same difference. No.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, here you have the freedom to choose somebody who's not on a single party ticket. You know,
Yeah. Or
like
not vote at all.
right. It's you can in other countries it's like you have one party to choose from and you can choose between a couple of different candidates,
Hmm.
but the reality is that that's not democracy when you don't get to choose the form of representation of your government that you want.
Right. Look at the UK and like Israel. They have parties, but then they have to build a coalition of
Germany is
different
the same way.
parties. Right. And it's like I don't know,
A lot of
like
European countries are that way, where
hmm.
you have multiple parties that have to build coalitions, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that's fantastic. Sweden's another one because they had their first female prime minister for all of like 3 hours, but then
Right.
the coalition immediately fell apart.
But I mean, you could actually vote for an independent in those countries or a Green Party candidate, and those candidates actually literally get elected. And if there's 10 of them now, that's a little coalition that you need to work with. And you get to gather those little coalitions till you make a majority, and then you all come to a consensus. I like that. You know what I mean? Instead of
hmm
just this two parties is leaving us like at two dead ends right now. That's an
Oh,
issue.
absolutely. There's a reason why I've called our system the party of bad ideas and the party of no ideas. And they
Right?
just happen to be interchangeable. Whoever's in charge is usually, doing nothing but implementing bad ideas,
Yeah.
while the other party goes, Yeah, well, we're not going to do that. Okay, well, what would you
Right.
do?
Yep.
Well, we're not going to do that. No, that's not the question I asked you. What are you going to do?
Hmm.
Not that. Is that an answer?
Yeah.
It's really annoying.
Agreed.
So,
We used to be a country of ideas. I mean,
mhm,
Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer from Germany gave us our biggest weapon of all time, right? And now in these days, what would we do? Say we don't want German scientists to help us? That's weird to me. Like that isolationism or thinking that America, if it wasn't the idea wasn't born and bred from America, it's a worthless idea is just ridiculous because we've never been that way as a country.
right. And that's I think the crazy reality of this all is that
Yeah.
we've moved towards this weird era of isolationism, but like
Hmm.
not militarily, I would say isolation in thought.
They
So,
want the people isolated, but the government expands its
right,
influence, not its territory, but its influence,
right.
while we remain suppressed.
So it's weird. It's really, really weird
Yeah.
because, in the past, we were like, what? We got people like Einstein that want to come here.
Hmm.
Cool. Oppenheimer, great. Then there was a few that we just like happened to take from the Nazis and,
Right. And other people came here for other things,
right.
and I don't even know their name. The girl that invented the vaccine of today was an
Hmm.
immigrant. You know what I mean? It's
Yep.
like, and we get information from everywhere around the world to make the best things possible. I just wish
Right.
people understand because America First or even Joe Biden's Buy American is kind of isolationism. You know what I mean? And it doesn't matter if
Hmm.
there's rhetoric saying we want to be more expansive, if you're still keeping all those tariffs and ideas Trump had and not changing them to become more of a borderless economic system, then we're just going to retreat into this.
I think that, and I will say that there has to be some caveats. Like, for example, like crucial supply lines,
Hmm.
obviously like chips are a big part of our supply system,
Hell
and not
yeah.
having them is not exactly a great day for us, so
Right.
I
But
think
also
I think
also buying them cheaply because Uyghurs made them isn't acceptable. To me,
right,
I don't think that's acceptable.
right. So I mean, there's definitely like some elements of, the way that I look at it is, you need to move more towards the grocery store model. You've got a few brands out there that, that they're higher quality brands, and you're going to be like, I like this one, I don't like that one. And then you got like the store brand, and you're like,
Mhm.
you know what, fuck it, that one's good enough.
Sometimes it
And
is.
exactly. I'm sorry, but there really isn't much of a difference between, your local store brand spaghetti noodle and the high priced spaghetti noodle most of the time,
Right, right.
especially when you ain't got any money and you're hungry.
That's right. That's right.
So the reality is that the complex relationship of Ukraine, Russia is very not much understood by Western countries and Western
Right.
cultures, and I would argue like people in general. But I will say that putting troops on the border of any country and telling them you do or don't want them to do something is not going to go the way that you want it to. And we've got to get, as a world, we have to get past this idea that if we want something, we put a military force on the border and give
Right.
them this false dichotomy of choice.
Yeah.
That's
Domination mentality. Troops
domination
can do
mentality.
what diplomats cannot, and that's not true.
And the thing is that, time and time again, what we say is nobody wins in war. I mean, United States is going to make a pretty penny off of selling military equipment, and
Hmm.
ultimately, somebody's going to end up having to go and fight. And the question is what countries are going to be willing to do that, and what countries are not going to be willing to do that, especially when, your ability to heat your homes is dependent upon one country, but
Hmm.
your values and principles are the hope of another.
That's right.
So
We're
it's a
trading
shitty
cheap
situation.
we're trading cheaper stuff from countries that commit human atrocities, and we're just accepting them. What I want to see is Vladimir Putin going to Ukraine and stating his case. Like here during an election, we have Donald Trump and Joe Biden stating their cases, and somebody wins. I would love to see Vladimir Putin stating his case to why his version of communism should be incorporated in the area. And if he changes the hearts and minds, then he does that. If he believes communism is the best form of government, then he should be able to speak to it and not force somebody under the barrel of a gun to do it.
I would make the argument that not only should there be a democratic solution, but a financial one as well. If, for example, the people in I remembered it now, Donbass and Luhansk.
Hmm,
If the people of those two regions were to vote for, if the people of those two regions were to vote for joining Russia,
right,
then what should happen is that Russia and Ukraine get together and have a discussion on purchase of that land, like we used to do in the past. It's like,
right,
hey, let's, rather than fight out this war, it's like there's going to be money spent on this.
right,
Why don't we do something constructive? That'll allow, number one, people who have voted in a free and fair election to become a part of the country that they feel that they belong to, but also two, would financially compensate Ukraine in a way that would allow them to invest in whatever, path forward they want to do.
yeah,
The reality is that if you're going to spend money, let's do it fucking constructively and
mhm,
not destructively, because guess what? You're going to spend a bunch of money on military weapons. There's going to be a lot of fighting, a lot of deaths.
right,
And then you're going to have to spend a bunch of money again on reconstructing these areas when the fighting eventually stops.
mhm,
Whereas instead of, you could literally have this exchange of funds once
that's right,
and never, and both countries now get to build towards what it
right.
is that they're looking to build towards. Like,
How do you
you know,
celebrate your history when you're constantly destroying it and rebuilding it, you know? Like,
exactly.
I mean, let's honor that. I mean, yes, there's other ways to do it then. And that's what irritates me about Vladimir Putin. He does things subversively and by force, which tells me he doesn't even believe in his own ideas. Come to America and speak to our Congress and say why communism is better. You have the right to do that. Bibi Netanyahu did that. He addressed Congress, right? We have these freedoms to do that here. You can do that. Don't subversively try and get, it's just, it to me, it's tough. There's diplomatic ways and then there's military ways. And you said it, like we have to get away from the domineering military presences.
Well, and I mean, it's tough because, as a country, for Ukraine, and this is where, you know, I couldn't imagine how it's going to feel like. You have a section of your country that's just like, "No, we don't want to be a part of you anymore."
Mm-hmm.
We've all had people leave our lives, and you're like, wow, that really is painful. That sucks.
Right.
But at the same time too, what that should do for you as a country is make you sit down and say, you know what do we do to show that the direction we're headed is the right direction, for the
Right.
people that are here.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there's always going to be a need for military, and especially in any region of any region of the world. But this idea that militarily this is a military is the only solution, like it's not the greatest idea, and it's not the greatest look, and we got to get
Right.
past that. Even the United States has to get past that.
Mm-hmm.
We talk
We're
because
trying though, I think.
I've
Desperately, I think we're trying.
I I hope so, um, because we shouldn't be in most of the areas that we're in terms of trying to protect other countries.
Right.
It's it has benefited other countries that we've been there, and in some ways it's benefited us, absolutely. There's
Oh, sure.
but at the same time too, like, military spending is expensive, and I don't know if many people realize that. you know Whether it's our budget or whether it's new equipment, upkeep of equipment, whether
Mhm.
it's paying
Training.
for troops, training
Yeah.
other people's troops, occupying military bases in other countries where we get invited in because we've got countries that have invited us in.
Right.
We've got
And we
countries
give
where
them
we're
our
just staying.
like Saudi Arabia, we went there and we helped them, but they couldn't actually use the military without our support because we were we were the blob, as it were, the
Hmm.
little technicians and all that stuff.
Right, right. And so,
Mm.
we positioned ourselves that way, and we realized it was the worst position to take because,
Hmm.
it makes it really difficult to have any sort of defense force if you're the one that has to be in charge of it.
Right. We have a surveillance state, I think, around the world. We need surveillance, and
Mhm.
but I think that is to tell other people and other militaries where they should beef up. I don't think it's like, okay, we see Russians massing on the Ukrainian border, so now it's our responsibility because we found it. I think we should be like, hey, world, this is happening. What do we do about it? Not, hey, United States. Personally, I don't think we should be sending 100,000 US troops, but I do think we should be on average in support as other European countries are in defending that border.
Absolutely. And I think that and I think that that's, it all depends on the solution that you want to take. I
Mhm.
wish that there were different slash better solutions that could be used. Because nobody wins in war. Nobody
Mm.
really wins. It costs everybody something. It
Yeah,
just costs it just costs some countries more than others.
yeah.
And that's not going to help. That's not going to help anybody. It's not going to foster goodwill. It's not going to foster growth.
Mm-mm.
It's not going to foster any sort of urge to, cooperate on, especially areas where, we desperately need to cooperate.
Right. Okay. So Russian people, I love you and I have no problem with your governmental system if you don't. Like I'm not judging you for that, but you, there's better ways than how your leader is handling it. Looking strong and is one thing, but sometimes strength is trusting the diplomacy, taking the longer road to ensure a more steady and solid base for
Mhm.
your argument. Going in with a gun just tells the world you don't believe in your theory. To me, that's what I'm going to say about it. I don't know.
Mhm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Man, let's
And, this,
see.
we're saying that as the country that's gone in with the gun
Well, I'm just
multiple
saying,
times.
yeah, I'm just saying that as a human from the United States that isn't like beholding to any of the governments involved.
Right, right.
Just a human perspective says we shouldn't send people, shouldn't send other people to kill other people
Mhm.
anywhere at any time.
Don't disagree.
Huh?
I said
Okay.
I don't disagree.
Gotcha. So we have like 15 minutes left. So I'm going to go say something in Belarus that irritates me. And so Belarus is inviting people, immigrants from Syria and Afghanistan into their country, flying them in and then putting them on the border with the European Union, specifically Poland, and then telling them they're unwanted and they should go to Poland to create an issue, and people are calling them illegal immigrants. And I wanted to get this on the record and say that's gross. They're not. They're being shipped in. They're being invited into the country that they're going into, and then they're being forced out, which doesn't make the immigrant the problem. It makes the people inviting them the problem. Have you
Mhm.
heard about this? Because it's really bugging me. This
Oh
situation
yeah,
is really bugging me.
there's been some great reporting on it, and
Mm-hmm.
this is one of those ones where, so to give a kind of an idea, there's these quote unquote travel agencies that are talking about how they can get people into the European Union by way
Right.
of Belarus. And so these travel agencies, what they're doing is they're finding people who are desperate to leave their country,
Right.
and they're spending a lot of money to try and get
Mm-hmm.
these people in, and then as soon as they get them in, are trucking them off to the border.
Right. Specifically to create a problem with
Now,
Poland.
the Belarusian government is what they're what they're doing is they're saying no, we're not responsible for it. It's these travel agencies and blah blah blah. But
Mhm.
given what we know about Belarus, where it's all under the control of the government, that's not that's a lie. So
Yeah. If you can
it's
ground a plane that's flying over your region and arrest somebody, you can stop these refugees from coming over.
yep. So the reality is that, Lukashenko there is trying to make himself out to be not the bad guy in the situation where he's absolutely the bad guy, and then
Mhm.
he goes crying to Russia when everybody's like, oh, when he says, oh no, everybody's trying to pick on me, and then he's threatening to shut Russian gas off to Germany and Poland and all of that.
Right.
He actually did it and called it unplanned maintenance, and it pissed off the Russians.
Of course, that's the Russian money.
Right, their economy right now is very heavily leaning on
Well, yeah,
petro,
because
and
without oil and gas, Russia's economy is the size of Maryland.
yeah.
With it, it's the size of Italy.
Hmm.
I don't know why I
So
know this stuff. God damn it, Jeffrey.
it's a great thing to know. So Belarus is like working this weird angle where they're trying to act like a Soviet SSR,
Uh,
but they're pissing off the guy who's, you know, paying them a lot of money to not fuck around with something.
right. And I just don't get the lying. Like, if you believe your ideas are good, just do it. Like, do it out in the open. Take the criticism. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's just it, is that he clearly is trying to start shit. And the problem is that
Yeah.
if Belarus starts something and fucking Poland reacts, that's not going to be good for Belarus.
Right. So originally, what it was Angela Merkel arranged for every country in the European Union to take a certain percentage of the refugees from Syria and Afghanistan,
Hmm.
Syria originally, and they would go to Turkey, and then they would be bussed into. But then the Eastern Bloc, the Belaruses and even the Polands said no, that's not fair, and so there was a standoff. But the European Union voted, and so everybody had to say take a certain percentage, and Turkey even agreed to this, like, we will stage them in refugee camps until you come and get them, and everything was fine. But now, so Belarus, what they're doing is they're saying we're taking them, we're taking our percentage, and then they're pushing them onto other people so that other
So,
people say we don't want them, so they can say, see, nobody wants them, send them back.
so Belarus is not a part of the EU. Let's make that very clear, real quickly.
No, right, it isn't, but that's why it's pushing people on the EU border.
Yeah, it's pushing them onto Poland's border specifically because Poland doesn't
Right.
want a bunch of immigrants coming in.
Which is sad in and of itself.
And
To
so
me, Polish people, be better. You're great people. The Polish people are so amazing and so welcoming. I don't understand that one at all.
there is another long and hard conversation to have about American
Yeah.
ideals versus you know France is for people who are French, and
Hmm.
Poland is for people who are Polish, and Germany is for the Germans, and
You
you
still need an ID card if you're black in France. Like,
mhm.
they're not like super woke. I don't expect Poland to be super woke, but
I but
like,
but in terms of being liberal about who they consider French, they're a lot different about it than, say,
right.
Germany or Sweden or Norway or Poland,
Hmm.
or I mean, for them it's you know they're like, especially having studied German law a little bit, and looking at, you have Greeks and Turks that were part of the 60s Gastarbeiter program in Germany, and
Yes.
while they live in Germany, they are not Germans and they're not German citizens, and they make it very clear to make sure that that's the case.
Yeah,
It's
pre World War One, right? The
no,
Greece was no.
no. This is from the 1960s during what's called
Wow. Okay.
the Wunderschaft, the German economic miracle. Um,
Wow. Okay.
so the policy was is that during Germany's rebuilding and how they got built back up, part of what they needed to do is they needed to bring in workers. So they brought in workers from Greece and Turkey to boost that. And so you actually have some very interesting Greek and Turkish populations within Germany itself. But the idea was is that they would work and then they would go home. Well, that never really became the case. They absolutely did the work, but Germany kind of became their home, and so they kind of get stuck in this realm of, you've got people that are Greek and Turkish who have done nothing but grow up in Germany and live in Germany, but for all intents and purposes, they are not German, and that's very much part of the German Constitution. In a lot of ways, what we had in America was this, idea that you could have people from any country, any background come in, and you're considered American because American was this idea. But in Europe, you still have very much an ethnic, or I would argue in the case of France, a very linguophile way of attaching relationship. France, I would say their version is modeled heavily after our own. So, which is why you see generally more acceptance of people of different cultures being quote unquote French, because they're heavily on the linguistic side. They're a Francophile language. But in terms of things like, places like Germany, for example, it's very much, they still have the law of lex sanguinis, the law of blood. So for us, it's a foreign concept of thinking, because the idea is that people who show up in America with the idea of being free and being able to build their own future is American. But in other countries, that's not the case. It's the land, refugees can certainly live in that country, but they will never actually be a true citizen of that country because they're not German, for example, or not Swedish, or not Polish, because that's how their constitutions are written.
We're a melting pot. We're not. There's no ethnicity to our democracy. You know what I mean?
Well, there's not supposed to be. We'll go with that. There's
All
not
right, well,
supposed to be.
thank you for listening to Public Access America. Find our live streams on YouTube every Sunday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and find the podcast anywhere you find your favorite podcast. I wanted to say, hey, thank you to Cult America for cross-promoting with us. We got that from RedCircle, and you'll hear that at the beginning of these podcasts. And go check out Unsubscribe with Kai. She's got a couple new episodes out. We're trying to get her on the show. And hi, Ezra. Thank you for watching. Oh, and we're back. And some of my least favorite discussions, the things that frustrate me most domestically. How about that stuff? So do you want to talk about guns? You want to talk about the shooter in Michigan, that the family, the whole debacle that is? I have a new phrase, Jeffrey.
What is it?
More Republicans in office just means more dead kids.
I mean, sounds about right.
Yeah, I'm going for it. Like, Republican voters have blood on their hands.
Well, let's see.
This next election.
I mean, given that you have a large percentage, like basically information that's out there right now, 90% of people who are aligned democratically have been vaccinated, with 10% not. But when it comes down to Republicans, it's been more like 50-50.
Yeah.
Or 60-40 or something like that. It's wild. And then when you look at the data of who's dying, that's being conglomerated by the CDC, and I will say, from all of these individual reporting states,
right?
CDC's not making this shit up.
Right.
They're getting this information from each state,
and you can
go look up your own states.
Right,
you can look up your own state's information. The reality is that unvaccinated people are 14 times more likely to die than vaccinated people are. Yeah. That's as of the last 2-week period.
You know what's interesting? I went and got my booster last week. 10 people in front of me in line, all conservatives, and all getting their boosters, which tells me 6 months ago, they got their shots. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a misconception. I think at a community level, it's more based on people's fears more than it is political.
Oh, absolutely. And really, like, this shouldn't have been a political thing to begin with. Like, there really shouldn't have been.
Anthony Fauci's a communist. What? What are you
what, shots
about,
for everybody?
Cruz? Right.
Oh, God. Yeah, you know damn good and well Ted Cruz is bitching about vaccines and blah blah blah, but that fucker got his shot. Yeah. And he's just being a fucking prick to everybody else.
Yeah, he's just being a prick. I don't know, because it's TV time. That's
well, yeah, that dude loves to hear himself talk. That's really
Hmm.
what it boils down to.
Well, he thinks other people like to hear him talk when he knows that they don't, because whenever he talks, they don't listen unless he does some stupid conspiracy shit like this.
I'm convinced that Ted Cruz just jerks off to Ted Cruz talking about Ted Cruz.
Yeah, I know, right?
I
Oh
mean,
God.
I don't have any explanation how one person can have their head that far up their own ass.
Yeah, I know. I know.
So, whatever.
Mm.
But I would say let's start with guns.
Yeah. I
Mainly
want
because
I want to say I want to get another debate going. I posted our gun series debate from a year ago, September. Jeffrey, there was actual footage in the theme song of Kyle Rittenhouse. You know, it was so weird to go back and listen to like what the news reports said from people at the time to what the court ruled. It was just so interesting to me. So go
oh
check
yeah.
that out on YouTube. It's under Red Light Spotlight playlist, and it's pretty interesting. But Jeffrey, you weren't there for that, and I want to get another network
No.
debate going because I think we need to keep discussing it.
Well, so this is this one's a fucking mess. Up one side and down the other.
Yeah, yeah,
But not in the same way that, the whole Rittenhouse debacle was.
right.
So this is, when you have one segment of the population saying, these shootings are all mental health issues, mental health issue, mental health issue, mental health issue.
Yeah,
I'm not inclined to necessarily disagree because there has to be some level of mental health issue and when you're
of
willing to
course.
go kill a bunch of people.
That's right.
That said, it seems as though there was a very clear picture painted of this being a mental health issue,
Hmm.
and the parents chose to do nothing.
Right.
So, what we do so let's start with what we don't.
But they didn't ignore him, they encouraged him. I think there's
I,
a slight difference there, you know what I mean? But I want to say, like, saying that gun,
from what I've seen is it's a mixture of both.
right. What I'm saying though is mental health is a gray area that we have to, it's a slippery slope. We have to be careful. We can't just blame every gun violence incident on it because then innocent people that are feeling sad 5 years from now could be tagged. So I want to be careful on that. That mental health goes in coordination with other things. If I feel like killing people and I have no access to a gun, then I'm not going to be able to do it as readily. So there's other factors too.
Eh, eh,
I know.
there are other factors, but we can go into that.
And it comes
Um,
down to regulate yourself, which is what we always say.
well, yeah, regulate yourself before
Mhm.
somebody regulates you.
Right.
So let's start with some things that we know we don't know about this whole situation.
Yeah.
Um, Number one, we don't know a whole lot about the kid's mental health or what he was searching, what he was writing, what he was doing prior to, I would say, before he got the gun.
That's
Because
true.
he got it as a Christmas present.
Right.
Um, Now, there's a bunch of people out there that are probably going to be pissed, and I'm going to tell you, like, I got guns for Christmas and birthday.
Mhm.
Um, you know,
You lived in
but
Montana. That's rational and it makes sense.
but here's the thing, though. It shouldn't boil down to where you live being the thing that makes the sense. The thing that quote unquote makes sense. I got a BB gun
if
when I
you're
was 7. I
if
got
you're
a
protecting
semi-automatic
yourself
22.
if you're protecting yourselves from coyotes and wolves, that's different than being in the city protecting yourself from a mocha cappuccino, you know.
I don't know,
Sorry.
man. Living in the city. There's a lot more to protect yourself against than what you would think growing
Yeah,
up
I
out.
know.
But here's the thing: is that getting a gun for your birthday is about responsibility. Number one,
Yes,
and
of course.
the question of whether or not the kid or the parents were thinking about this child's responsibility,
Hmm.
it just goes to show that they weren't. Now, I grew up around guns.
Hmm.
This was very much a very normalized part of my life. I had to take classes on using guns. I had to go out in the field hunting with my parents.
We
Um,
wanted to too.
I wanted to too. Uh, I went shooting for fun. I went but with my parents. I went
Right.
shooting for food. I went I had to shoot some stuff because I had to,
More responsibility with more education.
yeah. When you were irresponsible and you fucked up, um, you you got called under the carpet in a number of ways. Now, I'm not
Right.
saying all the ways that happened to me were probably the best ways, but the lessons stuck. I will say that.
Right.
But when you're dealing with firearms, one of the things that you have to think about is that it doesn't take a very big fuck up in order to really fuck up.
That's right.
You
That's right.
know, I have a friend who his the last 4 years of his life changed because he wasn't paying attention while cleaning his gun. And he damn near died from a gunshot wound to his own leg.
Yeah. Alec Baldwin's career is over because he didn't pay attention.
That's another thing we're going to get into.
Ooh.
Um, like, since we're on the topic of guns.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so the reality is that when it comes to giving a kid a gun, like especially like anywhere that you might live,
Oh, I think it's
I
normal.
I I think it should be considered normal, but I also think that that idea of normal needs to be highly predicated on the idea that this kid is going out with you. This kid is shooting with you. This kid is learning
Hmm.
with you. This kid is taking classes with you
You're
and by
you're
themselves as
you're
well.
regulating his education
Absolutely,
and being regulated in your own education at the same time.
because as any firearm owner will tell you, it's you know people who don't know anything about guns are usually the ones that are the most dangerous with them. Um,
Hmm.
Even just going back to Rittenhouse and that for a moment, that that fucking prosecutor took that assault rifle and fucking flagged the jury with an empty gun. Gun safety number one, treat every gun as if it were loaded. You don't
Right.
fucking flag anybody with a gun loaded or unloaded. That's how
Mm-mm.
Alec Baldwin ends up in his situation. And that is a fucking nightmare. So
Right.
people who know nothing about guns and gun safety are far more likely to, like the unvaccinated population, people who know nothing about gun safety are far more likely to end up negligently hurting somebody because they don't
Right.
know what the fuck they're doing. And
Hmm.
that's a problem. Then you got to move into the whether or not, you have the ethical responsibility of doing anything with that firearm. And I can't speak to that kid's mindset. I don't know if that kid went through any sort of firearms training in any way, shape, or
Right.
form.
We don't know
You
the
know,
conversation his parents
exactly.
had before purchasing that gun or the
Absolutely.
experience he had.
Absolutely. Like from my experience, I had years of hunting with my parents, going along on hunting trips, going shooting with parents before I went into hunter safety. Like
Right.
I had spent 5 years walking around with a BB gun on my property, plinking plinking birds or whatever I happened to quote
Hmm.
unquote find to shoot, which was usually just me shooting at trees and bushes and because there wasn't anything to shoot.
Again, in a more rural area.
Again, in a more rural area. I grew up in Montana. Um, but the idea was is that you get used to handling that firearm safely, and
Hmm.
you get used to that self responsibility. Did I fuck up with a BB gun? Yeah, sure I did. Did
Probably.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've had my fair share of ricochets come back and smack me and scare the shit out of me.
But then again, you also had somebody to go fall back on and say, what did I do wrong? You know what I mean?
Exactly. But then at 9 I got a semi-automatic 22 that I still have.
That's
And so
beautiful.
guess what? There the you up the ante and being able to fuck up. 22 can actually travel a long fucking ways. What most people
Yeah.
don't realize. Those things can actually those bullets can actually go out about a mile.
I didn't know that, but I believe it. It's a small
Yeah,
caliber though, right? It's
it's
the
a small
smallest.
caliber. It's a
Makes
small
it a good
caliber.
starting set. It's good for target practice. I used it in the beginning to target practice. So
They're great for target practice. They're great for small varmints. Like I
mhm.
can't tell you how many fucking prairie dogs and rabbits that I shot with that thing.
Right.
That's very much, but there again, it's like you leveled up. With a BB gun, yeah, you probably, it was either going to suck if you got shot with one or ricocheted with one, but the likelihood of you dying because you fucked up with a BB gun pretty minimal. 22, you can kill a person with a 22.
Right.
I mean, it's a lot easier to do it.
You
So,
can really hurt somebody with a BB gun right off the bat, but like
oh yeah,
you had some training and education before you reached the point of going solo even with the BB gun, you know.
absolutely. Like
Okay.
I had to learn how to shoot from my dad. I had to,
Hmm.
one of my favorite lessons of shooting was right after I got, that BB gun. It was Christmas time. I was with my dad. We set up some targets in the fucking garage, just some, styrofoam cups. And lesson number one, know your lesson number two in gun safety, know your target and beyond. And my dad shot that BB gun. It went through the cup, bounced off the metal, came right back and hit him in the fucking eye. No shit.
Wow.
And so, like, one
Is
of
he
my first
Ralphie?
lessons, what?
Sorry. Is he Ralphie?
Right? You'll shoot your eye out. So, which is why, like, when I go shooting, I wear eye pro. Guess what? It's
Hmm.
like, shit happens. And
Yeah.
so when I go shooting, I'm wearing ballistic eye pro because I don't want to catch a bullet in my eye. I watched my dad catch a BB in his eye,
It's always
and he's
easier to
lucky.
learn.
He's lucky he didn't lose his eye. He lost
Yeah.
vision in it for about a day, and then it came
Huh.
back, and he was fine.
Yeah.
But I remember
Off a
watching him
ricochet.
like fucking hit the deck after he got it, because I just hear pow, ding, fuck, and he
Oh.
just drops.
Yeah. It's easier to learn a lesson from somebody else's mistake than it is to learn from yours. So pay attention to other people.
Yeah, and especially if the
Yeah.
mistake is small enough,
Right.
you both get to learn the lesson. But when the mistake is big enough,
Mm.
you're gonna be lucky if you survive it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so there was a lot of learning. Like, sure, guns were fun and cool, but you didn't fuck around with them. And if you did fuck around with them, there were consequences that you paid for that.
Yeah.
Like, luckily, like, my most of my egregious mistakes were flagging people with a rifle or with a shotgun. And, not a good day. This shouldn't be a good day when you do that. And
Right.
when I taught hunter safety, I had to kick a kid out who consistently flagged everybody at the range because it's
Yep.
like, so
Self-regulation.
yep. So when I was in hunter safety, we had to carry around literally these things were, they would get like a rifle stock or a shotgun stock, and then they would just put a couple of wooden dowels on it. So that way
Mm.
it, and painted the wooden dowel black. And that
Right.
was your gun. And you would have to walk around with this thing, and you'd have to store it safely. Whenever we did stuff and move around, you had to hold this thing safely, and you had to make sure that you had it pointed away from everybody else, your finger wasn't on the trigger, things like that. So like you got a lot of practice before you got into the real thing. And then when
Exactly.
we got out into field day, you know we had actual live firearms that we would shoot with. But even still, our field day when I was a kid still was with those wooden guns. Now when I got into teaching hunter safety in the place that I did, kids would actually carry around actual firearms, but instructors had to go through and they had to check each of those firearms, and they had tape to show that they were cleared and locked and all of that other fun stuff. So you couldn't actually do anything with the firearm. So like they'd have
Right.
bolt locks in them and things like that.
It's a
But
progression of education, though.
exactly, get used to actually carrying a firearm,
Hmm.
and the consequences are swift and severe. So I can't speak to any of that with what this kid may or may not have done.
Right.
What I am saying here is strictly my experience with
Hmm.
firearms and instruction and growing up around guns. Are guns cool? Absolutely. Idiots are not cool, and that's whether it's kids or whether it's parents, it doesn't matter. And
Idiots raising idiots raising idiots. Eventually, there's
exactly,
going to be a loss in the fucking curve. You know what I mean?
absolutely. So we have nothing to say what this kid's experience training, what the parents' experience training, any of it was prior to this incident.
Right.
What we do know is that number one, the gun that was used was purchased for the kid. There's some debate over whether or not the gun was locked up. Now,
Yeah.
I
The
will
parents
say
say it was.
the parents say it was. The prosecutors, media said it wasn't. Now, here's where I'm going to say that this is where it becomes, an interesting gray area. A gun can be locked up, but if it's readily accessible, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily locked up. So, for
Right.
example, let's say that the kid has the key or the code to a gun safe. That does not
Right.
mean that the firearm is stored securely, at least in the eyes of the law, here in
Correct.
Washington, especially. Now, having concealed weapon permit is a little bit different, um, but even still,
Not at 15.
right? You don't have a concealed weapon permit at 15. In fact, I'm
No,
pretty sure, if I remember right, I'm pretty sure in every state you have to be 21 in order to have a concealed weapons permit.
I think so, yeah.
Um, I'm trying to remember the reciprocity laws.
Hmm.
You have
But
to be 21 in the state of
the
Washington.
prosecutor saying it wasn't locked up because obviously he used it, right? So,
Well,
and the
and
parents might be like, well, we locked it up, and he might have unlocked it and took it out.
right. Well, and then that's the other question is if for example, like anybody who has any type of safe, you're gonna have a couple of different mentalities. Number one, some people carry their safe keys with them.
Hmm.
Some people stash their safe keys in other locations.
Right.
Um, it's different for everybody. Um, I'm of the mindset of I don't put my safe keys with my car keys, because the last thing I need to do is lose my safe key and my house key at the same time.
Yeah, right.
But at the same time, my safe keys are not in the same place as the safe itself. So,
Hmm.
and just that kind of separation of, you have to make intentional moves if you're going to get into the safe,
Yeah.
or you have to be told the code if you're going to be able to get into the safe.
Hmm.
And so there'll be more information that comes out on that.
Still,
And
if you get your kid a gun, you're responsible for that for the rest
absolutely
of time, right? Like,
not for the until they're 18.
oh, well, if your kid is 30 and kills somebody with a gun you bought, you're still gonna feel that shit. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
I mean, don't get me wrong. You're definitely going to feel that shit.
I
Absolutely.
mean, not legally responsible, but morally, you're gonna feel that. I
Absolutely.
hope you do. Like,
Because you're going to always have that question of, how did what did I do to teach them or not teach them? But
right,
at
right.
some point, even as a parent, like, you've instilled enough life lessons in your kid,
Hmm.
and it's an ongoing process. I know my mom's still teaching me shit, I'm 36, and I know that having kids of my own, I'm going to be teaching them stuff as they get older, and they're going to ask for my knowledge, or
Hmm.
they're going to watch me screw up and go, that was awful, I'm not going to do that.
Right. Or they're gonna screw up, fix it, and hide it from you, but learn a lesson that way. You know what I
you
mean?
know yeah, hey, that sounds familiar. But
Sometimes you want in training, sometimes you're on your own and you fail and you got to fix it before the boss comes back, you know?
right, exactly. But in this case,
You can't clean
without
this up.
knowing the training thing, we move into what we do
Mhm.
know. Number one, the kid got caught researching ammo. Now, this is tough. um I don't know what he was able to pull up on the computer personally. Whether the school allows stuff like that to be searched is, that's up to the school,
I
but
thought it was on his phone and a student saw it and reported it.
not sure. I've heard that on a school
Yeah,
computer.
that's my problem with that.
It's, well, we won't know until later, but the issue there is that, um searching ammo, like, searching ammo is one thing, like,
Mhm.
especially like, if given, number one, if you know anything about guns, ammo is hard to find right now, and good priced ammo is hard to find right now. So
If I have a gun, I'm looking for different ammos. I want to know what each one of them does. I want to know what they're made of. I want to know which one's more powerful, less powerful. I want to learn about ammo if I just got a gun.
right,
That makes sense. I don't know if you should be doing it during class or in
that's
school.
that's not a yeah that's not the greatest thing, like, unless you're in, like, what I did. I was actually in physics class, and I was researching ballistics, because guess what, ballistics are part of physics.
Right.
And whether it's bullets, whether it's catapults, whether
Mhm.
it's rocketry, there's an element of physics to it, but it's about intent. What was your intent on searching this?
Sure.
I was searching up ballistics and ballistics charts, not because I wanted to go shoot up my tiny little school, but
Uh-huh.
because I was in physics and I wanted to learn more about the physics behind how different bullets operate.
Mhm. I,
Is
I
there
also don't think
something
a kid
designed?
I don't think a child should be like shopping at all during class. Like that was my point. Like
Oh,
I don't
absolutely.
it's not the bullets, it's the shopping. I don't think somebody should be shopping for shoes while they're trying to learn either, you know?
But also too, like, I don't know that he was actually shopping. I don't know what he was looking up. We know that he was looking up
Right.
bullets. We don't know what the reason or the cause was.
Window shopping, let's say.
Maybe. So
Maybe.
so number one, and what ends up happening is the school reaches out and says, hey, this is a little concerning.
Hmm.
Look, all I can tell you is where I grew up. Like, if we would have had this level of technology when I grew up, if you didn't think that there were about 30 kids that went hunting after school that wouldn't be looking up bullets, you'd
Right.
be crazy. It's difference, absolutely. Once
Are
again, it
many
goes down
people
to an
hunting?
intent.
Are many people hunting with a 9 millimeter
Oh, hell
pistol?
no, are you kidding? But I don't, once again, I don't know what he was looking up. Like, we
Right.
know he
I'm
was
just,
looking up
yeah,
bullets.
I
Don't know
know.
if he was looking up 9 millimeter or what.
This is a personal thing for me in the fact that every every gun has its purpose. It's built to do something. I
Hmm.
wouldn't use a bazooka to target practice.
No.
I wouldn't carry around an AR-15 in a city environment. I don't need something that goes 10 miles and shoots through everything it passes in the city. So what I'm saying is like a pistol is good for city protection, but you don't need a like a long rifle to go around
Well,
your neighborhood on
Well,
whatever that
and I would
is.
say that as somebody who lives in the city but also has rifles, it's about what you plan to do with them.
Well,
You
that's
know,
my point. Yeah, if you're getting attacked, pulling out a rifle doesn't make as much sense as a gun in that moment of being mugged. So for me,
oh,
it's
well,
these
absolutely not, because
situational things.
and that's where you go back to gun safety and the four rules. Number one, know your target and beyond. Like,
Hmm.
if you have an AR, there's a good chance that you're going to have something that's going to go through and through, and then the question is what's beyond that?
But my
You
point
need.
is, if a mugger is standing a foot away from you asking you for your wallet, you don't really have the room to pull out your AR and shoot it. It's longer than a pistol. So for me, it's just about utilitarianism. It isn't about power or anything. You
Mhm.
don't you use certain things for other things and you use a pistol to protect yourself in an urban environment. To me, that's how I feel that rifles and long guns are more for hunting and more for the uniqueness
But
of it.
rifles are meant for long distance engagements. Let's
Right.
be real. Let's be real honest.
which
But
are
even
which
still,
are which aren't as many in an urban environment.
no, they're not as many in an urban environment unless you're in a much more open setting.
Okay,
You
thank you.
know,
I just needed to clarify that from like a
absolutely.
year ago
That's
because
that's that's like,
I don't think rifles are more deadly than a pistol. I don't think a pistol is more deadly than a rifle. I think you use certain things for certain things. That's all it is
oh, I'm,
to
and then
me.
that's the thing, is like, I'm a surgeon with either one of them. So, like,
Hmm.
I'm a surgeon with a 22, and a 22 doesn't exactly have a hell of a lot of stopping power, but I can put four strategically placed shots, and I can take a person down real quickly.
Sure, sure, but it would be easier if you had an AR-15 and a scope if it was, say, 1,000 yards
Le-
away.
well, I mean, so at 1,000 yards away, you're starting to push the limits of that AR.
Well, you're not going out and hunting bear with a 22 pistol. It's just
You're not
like,
hunting, man. If
you
you're
know what I
hunting bear
mean?
with
Like,
anything less than a 308, you're nuts.
but there's different things for different purposes, and that's what I had a
Absolutely.
problem
There's
with Kyle Rittenhouse was an AR-15 isn't a close quarters combat sort of weapon, and so to me it was just stupid in that
Well,
way.
I mean, it's not a close quarters combat weapon, absolutely. And whether or not, like, this is the tough part, is that, what you're to kind of go back into this a little bit, that would be like saying that, the US military being positioned in, say, somewhere like Fallujah shouldn't have had their M4s on them at all because it's a city. That's not the right
Right.
answer. That's not the right answer, simply because, like, what you have to realize is that, it's about accuracy. At 50 yards, an AR is going to be a hell of a lot more accurate in terms of round placement than a pistol is.
But
And
what
so
about
that's one of
1 yard, 1 foot,
well,
close
that's
quarters, in a room with a confrontation? I understand what you're saying. I just don't think it makes sense to pull out a long gun to shoot at
it
somebody
all
that's shorter than that gun length is, you know?
it all depends, it all depends on what you have available to you. And
Yeah,
that's the
that's
and
true.
that's the
That's true.
difference. If you only have an AR available to you, that's what you're going to pull out, whether or not it's the right tool.
Yes.
You can have all the discussions about whether it's the right tool for the job.
Mhm.
Like in terms of home defense, if with an AR, yeah, no, I'm not going to pull an AR out in my home. Why?
That's
Because
my
that bullet's going
thinking.
to go through every fucking wall in my house,
Yeah, that's
and
kind of my point.
I stand a chance of inadvertently hitting somebody else. Whereas that pistol,
Yeah.
it's probably going to go through a few walls because let's be real honest, sheetrock is not going to stop much,
Right.
but it's going to lose a lot more velocity based on the
Hmm.
caliber and the cartridge of the gun than it is, say, an AR.
Right.
But once again, that's a huge distraction, because what determining what the tool for the job is
Yes.
very different than application. And what you have as a tool and what the right tool is often two very different discussions.
Well, I agree, but if you have a choice to bring a pistol to a close quarter protest, or an AR-15, I just find it funny that you would choose an AR-15 for close quarters. That's it. It's like you're saying. I
Oh
would,
yeah, no.
you know,
I mean, the likelihood of shooting somebody and having it inadvertently hit somebody else in
yeah.
the crowd. I mean, look, once again, look what happened with Alec Baldwin and
Hmm.
just a long Colt pistol. He brought a pistol, and that went through somebody else. That went through one person and hit somebody else as well. So, I mean, the reality is that when it comes to any sort of gun whatsoever, you are making calculated decisions when you're using that gun. But to to talk about what is going to be the best option, I mean, the best option, like with Kyle Rittenhouse, is that that kid should have never been brought over there by his mom, and that's the real answer. um, but moving past that, one of the things that we have to consider with this case out of Michigan is that, uh, besides the training, was the fact that the parents were put on notice, and the parents were put on notice multiple times. So you have the, hey, your kid's looking up ammo. It's like,
Exactly.
okay, don't. And the mom says, you just can't get caught doing it. It's like,
Right.
not the right answer. I'm going to go with, it's like, hey, you know what, I appreciate you wanting to look up ammo. Do it at home.
Yep. 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 But
Do
there
it at
might have
home.
been a plan to have a further discussion. Like, your kid's kind of depressed lately, and you want to make sure you're not attacking him, and
Right,
pushing
right.
him. So,
So you've got that, and then the next piece, which is, um the kid starts, this is where things get real damning really fast, where the kid put a drawing out there of a bunch of people lying around bloody, and it said, I can't make the thought stop, please help.
yep.
So at that point, like, this is where it gets real tough, because there should have been more involved here than just the teachers and the parents. I will say that, because when you see a drawing like that, that should be, you've got a school resource officer, or you've got a school psychiatrist, um,
Law
a
enforcement.
mental health and a law enforcement professional get involved.
Right.
That is one of those situations where I don't know what Michigan's protocols are, but that right there, because the parents were like trying to play it off as a joke,
Yeah.
and
I don't know
and
how you see that and ever let that kid go away. You know what I mean?
right. I don't know how, like, as a parent, like, if one of my kids drew something like that,
Yeah.
no, we're having some discussions immediately with a mental health professional,
I mean, there's
and
no
I'm
way you're
going through their
walking
shit.
away from that thinking
No, and I'm
everything is
going through
fine.
no way, I'm going through their shit. It's like,
Right.
look, there are a few times that I'm ever going to, like, straight up go through your stuff, but
Hmm.
something like that, I'm going through your shit, and I'm going through it thoroughly. I keep my stuff locked up for a good
Yeah.
reason. and only two people know what the codes and the keys are, and they're both adults.
I like that.
And there's a reason for that.
So they
That's,
they pulled the kid and the parent and the teacher and the principal in for a meeting, right?
I'm not sure how many, but I know it was the
Yeah, I
teacher and the
don't know who
parents
it
for
was.
sure.
I know there
Um,
was a base amount of people and
yeah,
yeah.
and there was some serious concern, and you're hearing that the parents didn't search the backpack, and I'm going,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that probably should have been something that the parents did, but also at the same time too, like there should have been some type of mental health professional there, or
Mhm.
school resource officer there,
Yeah, he
because
shouldn't have been
that,
going back to class. He should have been going to counseling or
yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah, but I don't see the parents necessarily thinking, well, the gun is locked up at home. I know it's locked up. I know where it is. He promised not to use it. He doesn't have it. I don't see
doesn't
why their
matter.
first reaction, but I'm not a parent, is to say he has the gun,
Doesn't To
I
me it
would be
doesn't
more
matter.
inclined to believe that it's not an issue.
To me it doesn't matter, because growing up around firearms, there are a few things that, this is as serious as a heart attack. When something
Hmm.
like this comes up, it doesn't matter, you deal with it,
Once you buy your kid a gun, you're responsible. So like every
period, end of
moment,
story.
that's the thing. Every moment is your responsibility. So,
And so in this moment, there should have been no question, if the parents weren't going through that, their kids shit right there on the spot, there
mhm.
should have been a resource officer and a mental
Law
health professional.
enforcement.
Because I mean, in terms of today's day and age, I think that alone would have been probable cause for an officer to go through that kid's stuff right there.
Well, I agree. I had an officer go through my car because I locked it. I got locked myself out. He found a bowl. But
Hmm.
I don't think the kid should like it should have gone from that meeting to the parents taking the kid home and having further discussions. Like
Right.
I don't like I'm saying he would have
The
never been out of my sight at least the rest of the day until there was ongoing counseling.
there was I would say a negligent level of inaction
Hmm.
that was present
Yeah.
in that. Now, I would say that from now, it really depends on what happens next. You know, I think Michigan has every reason and right, based on this case, to say that, if teachers have anything like this happen, that there should be a resource officer and there should be a
Yeah.
mental health professional in those meetings, and that people should be going through that kid's shit.
The sheriff, the
Any
sheriff
kid's
said
shit.
the sheriff said the school didn't follow protocol on
Okay, I hadn't
contacting
seen that.
them. You know what I mean?
I
Like
hadn't seen that.
the sheriff's
So,
department, law enforcement has protocols that go into effect when this happens, and it didn't. And
okay.
the parents fought to keep the kid in class as opposed to how it was supposed to go. So there was a lot of mess ups in there. But
There's
I did watch the sheriff's press conference, and he was
okay.
really bummed that he was responsible for a situation that they didn't address sooner. And
Right.
yeah.
So and that's the thing, is that if there was a protocol in place and that didn't get followed,
Hmm.
then there's seems like there's part that's on the school as well.
Hey,
Um,
is that teacher going to be charged with manslaughter
you know,
because they
I,
didn't follow protocol? That's a tough one, right?
that's the tough part, is that, if that teacher didn't have the means to be able to do that, if it was up to a principal or a mental health
Right,
professional and
right,
that wasn't
right.
there, passing this blame buck around is not gonna do anybody any good, other than
I agree.
it's like, this is serious as a heart attack, this happens, these things have to happen, period, end of story, there is no ifs,
Hmm.
ands, or buts, so there's no arguing, there's no nothing.
That's my
It's like,
point.
this is what happens.
We can place blame on everybody, right down to his friends that knew he had a gun, but didn't know if he had it on him. Like we could, or we could just
You could
figure out how
try.
to fix the solution or address the situation, learn from it, and get ready for the next time. Because they had shutdowns that really saved lives in that
Mhm,
school. Not enough lives, but the shutdown actually went pretty well. I
mhm.
mean,
Considering,
considering, thank you.
you know um
It feels gross
so
to say, but more people didn't die because of what we learned from other school shootings.
and that's really unfortunate, that's an issue,
Hmm.
um this day and age, in my in especially for my kids,
Yeah.
you know so you have what looks to be protocol failures. You have failures on the part of the parent. You have all of that. Then when the school shooting actually happens, you have the mother sending a text to the kid saying don't do it, and the father leaving work to go home and see if that gun was at home, and it wasn't. So bad decision making all the way around.
But
Lots of
what do you think was going through the dad's head when he saw the gun wasn't there?
oh god, I
That's his moment of realization, right? Like, oh, I fucked up. Or was it like, oh, I couldn't have known? Like, I wonder what he thought in that moment.
it doesn't matter. I think at that point, like you can talk about what was probably going through his head, but it doesn't matter. I think that
Mhm.
the failings of earlier in the day
Yes.
are far greater than whatever he was thinking in that moment afterwards.
But
I don't I like
did he learn his lesson in that moment? Like
no, but he gonna learn.
did he see the error of his way in that moment and say, now I'm fucked because I didn't do things right ahead of time? I want other people to realize there's moments like a step ladder, moments of realization till you get to the point where you can't get past it.
It doesn't matter. The moment of figuring this shit out happened when they got called into the school.
Or
Like
giving him the fucking safe combination.
or whatever they did.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
It was a series of little fuck ups that led to a point of no return, is my point.
well, and I would argue that there were little fuck ups, and the big fuck
Mm-hmm.
up came before the school shooting when those parents were in there.
Yep. Yep.
I
Yep.
don't give a shit, like as a parent, if I found out my kid made any type of threat like that, you
Right.
damn well bet that whatever is happening the rest of the day is me, number one, making sure that every other kid is going to be safe from my kid, number one.
Because you're a parent first and a friend second. You don't need to
And
be a
then
friend to your kid all the time.
number two, then we're going to figure out what therapy looks like.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go meet with somebody immediately,
Yeah.
and from there we're going to figure out what has to happen in order for things to get better. Because if
Yeah.
you have to think about public safety first, especially if if your kid may be a danger to others. And
Mm-hmm.
that's tough to say. That is tough to say.
And
you
yeah.
know and this is coming from somebody who was a danger to himself. Like, you know with my own depression issues, I was a danger to myself. I never wanted to hurt anybody else, but
Right.
I was a danger to myself. And so as a parent, what I learned is that you have to stop the danger aspect first. It doesn't matter if it's to somebody else or to the kid itself.
Yeah.
You have
But
to
you
stop the danger aspect, and then from there you have to figure out getting help for that kid immediately. It's got to be like, it's like
yeah.
you drop whatever fucking anything you have going on. It's
Mm-hmm.
immediate. You're going through steps. Like, if you have to put your kid on a 72-hour hold, then so be
But I think if your child is depressed and you know it, you don't know
it.
if he's not depressed unless you talk to your child every day. You need a baseline of who your child is. You can't just pop into his life one day and say, "Are you hiding depression from me?" I can't tell. You should know your child. You know what I mean? Like, to
Well,
a certain extent, you should have built that trust and relationship up to where they could come to you and say, "I'm feeling depressed," and you don't go, "Oh, I hate you. You're going to jail. I'm gonna punch you," or something stupid.
even in this day and age where there's more information about depression out there, there's still a lot of people that don't understand what depression actually looks like.
Uh-huh.
And that's the tough part, is that it's hard to know what depression actually looks like in terms of youth, and how do you address
Uh-huh.
that,
And getting
unless number
judged
one.
for it though, when you
Oh,
when you bring
absolutely.
it up and get judged for it, then you don't know. Nobody will ever know if that person is depressed again because you judged them and now they're hiding it and you know nothing. They can
Absolutely.
act good and you can give them the gun back because you think they're happy. They're faking it.
Could be.
Maybe
Absolutely.
at times
Uh,
in certain situations. Sorry.
Absolutely. So that whole situation is where things get really fucked up for the kid.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's talk about a couple of interesting parts about this. Where number one, they're charging the kid with terrorism. I think, I was interested to see how that charge was going to play out,
Yeah.
because if the kid was, planning this out, like, if this was a well planned out thing, now there's going to be a lot of conflicting definitions of what well planned out means. You're going to see the defense's
Uh-huh.
version of it. You're going to see the prosecution's version of it. It's going to be kind of a fucking mess.
Who committed an
Um,
act that terrorized people, dude? It's pretty simple to me,
it's
but that's me.
but now here's the question: if the kid has mental health issues, can you really call it terrorism? And that is where, number one, there is no precedent for charging anybody with terrorism in a school shooting. That has never happened.
That's right.
So that made it interesting, number one. But now when we got more information about the kid, making these drawings saying, I can't make the thought stop, please help, to me it became less likely that terrorism charges would stick.
I
um,
agree.
and that's the tough part, because I mean, you can definitely try and draw the line between terrorism and mental health. You absolutely could try and make that link. I think it's going to be a lot less likely to you're going to be a lot less likely to make that link. I mean, by the purest definition of the word terrorism, was it a terrorist act? Absolutely, there's no question about that. But I think you also have to factor in intent in that line as well.
Sure.
And the question around intent and somebody who is suffering from severe mental illness is very difficult to paint that picture, because I would argue that from a psychological standpoint, I don't know that we know enough to say whether or not that level of intent can or would exist. That's well beyond what I'm capable of knowing at this point. And so there's
Anybody
going to be a
that
lot of I don't knows in this.
anybody that murders somebody else has to have at least inkling of insanity to me,
I mean,
so
I don't disagree with that at all, but at the same time too, I think,
mhm,
when you look at terrorism, you've got people that thoroughly believe what they're doing is right and just. And
right.
does that actually apply in this case? And the
I
answer
have
is I don't think so.
people
And
are
so I think,
saying people are saying we need a domestic terrorism law, and I'm saying we don't because I don't want that to become this gray spectrum to where anything they want to put under a terrorist act is because they just justify it afterwards. Like I want to be real leery of domestic terrorism when other laws fit just as fine. Murder is just fine, like murder is going to put him away forever. I don't need to call him a terrorist.
well, and I think that's just it, is that I I think that there are elements of terrorism that you can also charge, but I think you have to prove intent on that the intent was to not just murder but scare the public into panic. And you can make the case that, well, any shooting is going to do that, absolutely, but I don't know that. It's tough. That's one that's going to be really tough to see, and especially when
Yeah.
there is a very clear mental health portion to this.
I want to say that maybe they added that in just to keep the bond up higher. Like you can drop a charge later, but you can also make it seem more than it is to get, I don't know. I mean, did he even get bond option? I wouldn't
I
guess he
think.
did.
Oh, I don't remember what the bond option was. I will say this: when it comes to the removal or adding of charges, they could have added terrorism later if they wanted to. I think
Mhm.
I think what this boiled down to was a strategy on the part of the prosecution for future school shootings, is that they would start, by adding terrorism into school shooting charges, which I don't think that they're necessarily wrong to do that. Now they can choose to drop that later, but at the same time too, it's like when you look at the number of school shootings that there have been, sure, you've got a lot of kids that end up taking their own lives that happen afterwards, but then you got some that were out to just send a message, whatever that message was.
If a kid wants to kill a bunch of kids, calling him a terrorist is only going to ensure that he does that. Uh, a terrorist says he's going to be remembered forever, whereas, murder just says you're going away.
And that's the tough part. you know every everything is kind of relative in that regard.
Yeah.
What it boils down to is intent. And so does
Seems like
that mean that
overkill to me.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree, but at the same time, I can also see why they're looking at doing that, because when it comes to, there's another factor in here, is that when you have terrorism as one of the charges, it opens up a lot of different resources for you to be able to use.
That's what I'm saying. They like I called it for bond, but there's more there's more options for you if you use a variety of charges.
And so like when you have somebody that's listed under terror, charged with
Hmm.
terrorism, you have a lot more resources at your disposal.
They could have called it a hate crime if one of the people was a minority, just to get the resources from the federal government to investigate it
mhm.
more, you know.
Which then turns out that you kind of needed some federal government resources when the parents got charged with involuntary manslaughter and fucked off with themselves.
They weren't fleeing. They weren't fleeing.
Hmm.
They weren't fleeing.
Yeah, they were found quite a ways away. They had withdrawn $4,000 in cash. They were hiding in an empty commercial building.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go with bullshit. Um,
me too.
Here's the thing. So, having a bunch of friends and family that work in law and deal with, I would say, some of the worst of the worst. Um,
Hmm.
there have been times where, basically, um, you've had people that had committed some of the most heinous crimes imaginable, and they went to their attorney's office, and there they sat with their attorney until they got everything that they could in place, and then they called local law enforcement and the prosecutor's office and whatever other agencies that were going to be involved,
Right.
and they flat out made the case. It's like, my client is here with me. They will be turning themselves in.
Yep.
You can pick them up at this location. uh, we can we can figure this out and do this however you want, um, but I'm here to preserve my client's rights. And I have seen the worst of the worst peacefully arraigned under the guidance of their attorney. Like, I've seen it personally. I have seen it. I have seen it done through friends. I've even read about a number of cases. The fact of the matter is that those attorneys, if they were not in direct line of sight of their client at that point, the choice that they made the moment that they were arraigned, it should have been that those attorneys or somebody from their office, another attorney, was headed there to meet their client, to essentially be there with their client and make sure that they're literally on the phone with law enforcement and negotiating that release to law enforcement.
Yeah,
And
they didn't need permission to turn themselves in.
they didn't need permission to turn themselves in, and more importantly, like, there needed to be a lot more communication than there was.
Hmm.
And guess what? There wasn't the communication there.
I mean, the
So
prosecutor didn't even tell the sheriff's office the charges were coming. Like the sheriff didn't even know these people were going to be charged. So he didn't have them under surveillance or be watching them like somebody would do if the charges were pending. You tell law enforcement that these people are going to be charged so law enforcement can be ready. And they
right.
weren't, which allowed these people to escape.
Yeah, well, and the actions, like, so in legal terms, what you see is, you see a number of different things. Like, prosecutors do it, defense does it. The idea is that you focus on a specific act, and you say, oh no, well, this act wasn't them trying to escape, and this act wasn't them trying to escape, and this act wasn't trying to escape.
Hmm.
But when you look at the totality of the circumstance, is what it's called, each one of these individual actions don't make them trying to escape, but when you put all of it together, it paints the picture that they were absolutely, like, trying to get the hell out of Dodge.
The
It's
the
like,
lawyers did stick up for them in their arraignment.
mhm.
I woke up and turned on the TV and I watched the whole thing. So
Yeah, I
it
watched
was
that
it
video.
was it was an interesting process, to
I
watch
think,
that.
yeah, and I think that that's, whether or not they had another attorney in there that could have been working on this or not, it's hard to say.
Right.
Um, but all I know is that the those defense attorneys put out a statement the night before saying my clients will turn themselves in,
Hmm.
and then they didn't.
Right.
And that was not a good day for the defense.
Mm-mm. Or the perceptions of the parents. I was just, it's a
Nope.
funny, the whole time I just wanted to ask you, do you think the parents should have been charged? Do you think this is a new level in charging, because
It is a new level in charging, and the question becomes, is it an appropriate level? And I think absolutely in this case.
okay,
I do from the standpoint of, if the parents had no clue, if there weren't any of these other things that happened at the school,
right.
and this kid literally just like walked in and did what he did with none of this other stuff,
Columbine, or yeah, like a Columbine sort of Sandy Hook thing.
then I would say possibly, because I can't know what all scenarios existed at the home before
Yeah, you
this
would
happened.
gather the evidence and make a
Right.
determination. We can't do that here. We're not those people. We don't jump
No,
to conclusions like the media does.
no, but based on the totality of the circumstances that happened, the ammo thing by itself, not enough to make me say,
I agree.
it was when the kid had drawn the picture that he did, that said,
Hmm.
and it had the things on it that it had.
He asked
And
for help, and
and
people denied him that help.
exactly. And
Yep.
at that point, I would, this is where it's tough, because I don't know if it's incumbent upon the law, if it's incumbent upon the parents, under how Michigan has it.
Right.
But as a parent, at that point, there should have been absolutely no question that there were certain steps you needed to take.
Hmm.
And those parents did not do that.
Yeah.
And so in this case, absolutely, I think that they are absolutely they should have been charged, and as they
Yeah.
were. And that is, as somebody, as an avid gun owner, um, you have to take safety very, very seriously, whether it is safety for yourself,
Hmm.
safety for your kid, or safety for the general public. You have to think about these things constantly when it comes
Yeah.
to firearms ownership. And there's a good reason for that. These things are deadly on a good day. And in the hands of somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, it's dangerous. But in the hands of somebody who does know what they're doing, it's worse. And in the hands of somebody who is absolutely committed to making something happen, there was already evidence that this kid planned on making something happen. That drawing, that reason that the teacher brought those parents in, was proof positive that this wasn't a joke, this wasn't art, this wasn't anything that should have been poo-pooed. Now, you can talk about whether the school is at fault for this, whether law enforcement's at fault for
I
this,
just want
whether
to
the
stop it
parents.
from happening again. I want to let people know where it was that it went derailed, and I think you hit it. I think, like you said about guns, I think taking your responsibility as a parent seriously is imperative to creating a child that doesn't go around killing other people. And so
Right,
I think if your child at any point in any manner says, even as a joke, I need help, you need to shut up and say, tell me more, and carve out space immediately to listen to
hmm
them every time.
and
Even
you
if
need to
it's about
take.
something stupid, it's not stupid to them, right?
Right, right. And that's the other thing too, is that as a parent, you have to be willing to take some pretty drastic steps as well. Um,
Hmm.
so, if you think that your child is potentially going to harm somebody with a firearm, and you have a house that has several firearms in it,
Yeah.
you need to be making arrangements to have those firearms removed from your property in the short term.
Right. Because
And
even great parents have kids with issues. I'm not saying that,
exactly.
but you can mitigate that a bit, and you can see. I like to see the future by paying attention to the present, right? And you can do
Right,
that with a child. You know where they're headed if you pay attention to them, but it's hard to turn a cruise ship from hitting an iceberg when you see it right there, you know?
right.
Give yourself enough time and space to see the trajectory of your child.
And don't ignore the fact that you're about to hit a fucking iceberg.
Right, right.
That's the other thing. And then be like, oh, and then send a message later saying, don't do it.
Hmm. Yeah. What was that for?
So when the shooting started
Yeah,
and
I
the
just
news
wonder
broke,
what her goal was, what she thought would actually happen by telling her kid don't do it after he had started.
I don't know what her goal was, but I know what that's going to be used for.
Because there was no news report that she saw that said he's about to shoot people, right? So there was no way that that was preemptive. She
No.
heard that he had done it and told
She
him
heard that
not
there
to
was
do
a
it.
shooting and then wrote, "Don't do it."
Right, right, right,
So the fact of the matter is that that's not exactly a very helpful text for the defense.
right. No, it isn't.
Um,
Mm-mm.
so yeah, that's it's a bad day in terms of, you know,
Yeah,
in terms of all those families. And there was a massive fuck up there. And whatever the protocol is or is going to be after this, I
yeah,
think that it's something that they're going to get figured out, and that needs to be replicated
yeah.
in every state.
Yeah, I
You
just
know,
think parents can't push the responsibility of raising their child off on law enforcement or
no,
educators. Like at some point, it has to be the responsibility of a parent
right,
to keep that kid on track. And like I said, even great parents have kids that go off the rails, and that's
right,
going to happen, but it won't happen as much as it, if we pay attention to them.
right. So it's this is truly a tragic incident.
Right.
There's no question about that. But there were some very obvious failings, and
Yeah.
those, unfortunately, there are people who are dead and wounded because of those failings,
Yeah.
and I think that, there's going to be a need, the need for justice is strong. And the reality is that people abdicated their responsibility.
You know,
And
there's a judgment where people are convicted, but there's never like a paper that says these are the root causes that could solve the issue next time. You know what I mean?
well,
There's no
that's yeah,
scientific panel like addressing and studying these statistically to prevent them. They're just saying, "Oh, this guy did it. He's guilty. Bye. We don't want to know anymore, really." Like,
and that's but that's just it, is that, that's unfortunately been strategic. You
yeah,
know, if if
yeah,
if if it's a mental health issue, and having to admit it's a mental health issue is going to require then that you supply mental health resources in order to prevent the issue.
yeah.
And so I would say that unfortunately the system is functioning as intended.
I think it's a mental health issue, but there's other things that contribute. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
mental health alone doesn't kill people, but mental health and opportunity might. So,
Mental health and opportunity might, and uh, you know, unfortunately, inaction
mhm.
also does.
But you know, if you take away somebody's gun and they want to kill people, they'll find another way to do it.
It's true. It's very true. I mean, unfortunately, Waukesha is dealing with the fact that you had several people die and several people injured because somebody ran over a Christmas parade.
Oh my God, yeah.
So the idea that that there isn't another way is unfortunately false.
Yeah, he used a truck, right? Like I was trying to think to myself, like guns give you the option to kill, but what doesn't? Like even water gives you the option to kill somebody. So it's a tough thing. You name an object and I could probably think of a way to kill somebody with it.
When we look at what mass killing looks like, it's an entirely different discussion as it is.
Yeah.
I think what it boils down to is that, there is absolutely a mental health aspect, and it's been something that's been shoved aside,
Hmm.
um, rather than addressed. People who want to keep their firearms rights but not address mental health issues in regards to mass killings,
Yeah.
what's going to end up happening is you're going to have your rights adjudicated for you, because at some point people are going to they're going to have enough, and they're going to decide what your right is. And if you don't want that to happen,
Regulate yourself.
and if that includes, addressing the issue through mental health, then it's time to actually start having an earnest discussion about helping people through mental health and
Yeah.
putting the resources in place so that kids are getting adequate mental health uh, services available to them, whether it's at school, whether it's
Hmm.
after school. It's there. We know that it can help,
There was
but
more privacy in mental health. honestly. The fact that somebody needs to be reported if they're thinking or want to talk about these things is really problematic, you know. This
And
kid could have found a counselor just on his own, walked in, sat down. I wish that's the way it was, that he could have found somebody to talk to before this happened. And I wish it would have been his parents, you know, but
yeah.
maybe not. They seem a little stupid. Maybe I don't want him talking to them. Maybe I want him finding professional help. I wish it was more readily available, accessible, and private so that people could have these conversations, you know.
Well, and that's the tough part is when you're looking at the edge of public health.
Hmm.
If somebody says, "Hey, I'm thinking about killing a bunch of people at my school," I don't know that I want just the parents involved or only the therapist involved, because when it comes to
Of
public
course
health
not.
and safety, I think you have to be as cautious as possible.
But do you think there's a way that a therapist, I'll end on that. I have to end on this. Do you think there's a way a therapist could work with the patient in moving that forward? Like instead of the therapist reporting them, having the person agree to report it, right? Like that, isn't that what therapy is? Getting a person to a better place of acknowledgement?
In terms of something like that, I don't think so, but I think basically what you can do is temper the response. So
Right.
basically,
The immediate response, the
so,
immediate.
so basically, it's that, hey, let's be on alert for, you
Mm-hmm.
know, rather than, oh shit, something's happened. And
Correct.
that's the difference. Is that I think that even in terms of like a let's say that you have a therapist that reports the kid saying, hey, I want to hurt people. Law enforcement has to be notified, number one, but number two, give that gives people the power, that gives the family the power to figure out how to keep, number one, themselves and their kids safe, and but more importantly, the public in general safe.
Course,
And
but it prevents the kid from actually ever starting the process unless he
well,
draws a picture that says help me and people ignore him, you know.
well, and what it boils down to is that if you're going to, number one, treat it, number one, and number two, view it as punishment, then yeah, it's never going, if it's a punishment thing, it's never going to get better.
Kid's
But
going to see it as punishment even if it isn't. That's I don't think it's punishment. I think the kid would see it as punishment.
well, and that's where you have to set up these expectations, and that's where education comes in.
And parenting. Yeah.
Yep.
I love you, Jeffrey. Thanks for
Love
being here.
you too.
We
You
do
take
this
care.
all the time. Go give everybody a hug.
Will do.
Happy holidays. Thank you for listening to Public Access America. You can find our live stream on YouTube every Sunday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and find our podcast anywhere you find your favorite podcast. Yay. Oh, shit. I almost hit the wrong button. Sorry. and, and,
and
and, and.
and there it is.
All right.